now. Bombs away. So let's talk about Fallout. With me, we are the Legal Geeks, and we are here to discuss Fallout Season 1 and a bunch of Season 2. So spoilers will be mentioned here about the Wasteland. So I'll ask all of our panelists to each introduce themselves, starting with...
Hi, I'm Katrina Wraight. I'm of counsel with Best and Krieger in our San Diego office. I focus primarily on environmental law, CERCLA, Superfund stuff, so cleaning up contaminants.
I'm Kate Bridal. I'm a content creator and licensed attorney here in California. I make a podcast called Now It's Ruined, where I ruin everyday stuff with dark history and facts. And I also do a sketch series on TikTok and Instagram called Living with Lecter, where I pretend to be in a relationship with Hannibal Lecter. And I'm actually currently developing a series based on that sketch series where it's original characters and the original plot, and I'm working with Crypt TV to hopefully start production on that next year. And fun fact, one of the actors who's maybe going to play my male lead was in an episode of Fallout.
Oh, yeah.
So there we go.
I'm nowhere near as interesting. Hi guys, my name is Carol Najera. I'm a judge for Los Angeles Superior Court. I do felonies in Compton, the real Wasteland. This is different.
All right, hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth Wright. I'm a United States Magistrate Judge in the District of Minnesota, so I'm excited to be in California right now. Looking forward to the panel. Hey folks, my name is Vanessa Palacio. I am an attorney at Greenberg Traurig. I try cases. I do mostly intellectual property. I'm licensed in California, Florida, and for the USPTO. Thrilled to be here. First time on a panel. Usually I'm in the audience in the costume.
So this is Judge Wright and Vanessa's first Legal Geeks appearance. So, welcome. So let's start with something light. Katrina, what is the law, state of the law after a nuclear war?
Yeah, so we don't normally think about this too often, and I'm sure the judges would prefer you didn't think about it too often, but you need to believe in the law and have institutions for it to exist. So typically we have three branches that are intended to function. So we have the legislature that's supposed to create the rules, the executive that's supposed to enforce them, and the judiciary to resolve the disputes. And if you strip all those away, we're left with just text or a very, very well written suggestion. So what happens when an institution fails? Well, the rule of law also collapses. What the rule of law typically requires is a little bit of a philosophical outlook real quick. Is generality that the rules apply broadly to everyone, which doesn't apply so much in the Fallout context because rules become local and they become faction-based. The rule of law also requires predictability, that people can plan around the rules, so you know what they are and try to avoid the crimes, for example. But in this situation, survival will replace planning. You need adjudication, typically third-party decision makers, two of which we have to my left. But in this context, it's not the people that are appointed or put in those positions, it is whoever has the power to enforce them. So what you're replaced with is de facto governance. So before you had pretty much de jure authority, and it comes down to what people can enforce. So what this would be most like similar to in the real world would probably be early medieval law or frontier justice or failed state governance generally. You can't have communities like the NCR or settlements decide that they want to make their own rules, reinstate rules, or enforce prior ones. But other than that, you're pretty much on the hook. So on that front, it becomes more what we call the legal world replaced by doctrines. We'll call it wasteland governance in this situation. So for example, run through a few types of the laws. Property law, possession will become everything. So you probably resort to finders keepers. For contract law, you have offer acceptance, consideration, and then whoever's able to physically enforce that. Tort law will evolve too. Typically, negligence standard is the reasonable person, but now the conduct would have to fall to a reasonable wastelander, which Lord alone knows where that would take us. Strict liability as well, like if you're keeping something, for example, like a death claw, that's probably ultra hazardous, and just the fact that you have it gets you on the hook. And criminal law and corporate law will be discussed by the ladies in the future slides as well.
Thank you. Judge Wright, two rights. Can you tell us about what's the state of the new California Republic?
Sure, and kind of building on what Katrina said, one of my favorite science fiction authors, Lois Joel, said that basically governments only exist in our heads. So, wrapping that into this conversation, what is the legal status of the New California Republic and the Legion? What I turn to when I look at this question is the Montevideo Convention of 1933, and it sets forth these requirements for establishing a nation, whether you're doing it by leaving another nation or kind of starting from scratch. You need to have a permanent population, sort of a defined population. You need to have some sort of defined territory, of course. You need to have a functioning government, which I would describe as having an entity that can create and enforce laws, manage the resources of the nation, and provide services. You also need to have meaningful relationships and relations with other nations, whether for trade purposes or other reasons along those lines. And I think that extends beyond simply going to and work with them all the time. And then ideally, but not always, you would have recognition by other nations or by an international organization, which we would think of today as being the United Nations, but of course in fallout, I think it's a good question as to whether there's any international organization that would even recognize another nation state. So I would say the New California Republic likely met these requirements. The Legion is an interesting question because it's a little bit more of a brute force type government. I don't really see the Legion as operating to, for example, provide services to its citizens. It's just more about taking control. So I would give them a thumbs down, and I would give New California Republic a thumbs up. I see questions. Do we want to take? Oh, we're just getting a thumbs up. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, thumbs up. Okay. I was like, already a question? Okay. All right. So this is going to go a little bit into American history, but I was thinking, what are some good analogies to the New California Republic? So we actually have one from the United States. I'm going to go back to 1784 and just give you a tiny history lesson because this has happened before. From 1784 to 1789, there was an attempt to make first an independent state called Franklin, and then an independent nation called Franklin. This is a real map from the time. It was going to be located in what is now eastern Tennessee. If we go to the next slide, you can see it more in context. So it's like that little bit called Franklin wedged in there. Of course, at the time, we didn't have states like Tennessee and Kentucky. We just had the 13 original states. So if you go to the next slide, you can see the state of Franklin was short-lived, and I think this illustrates how challenging it can be to create a new nation. The way this came about is in 1784, North Carolina actually offered this land to Congress to try to pay debts, okay? But then a couple of months later, North Carolina was like, wait, maybe that's a bad idea. We could probably make more money off of real estate, so they rescinded the offer. But what this did is it put into people's heads the idea that you could start your own state or your own nation. So the people living there were unhappy with North Carolina. They seceded from the state. They sought statehood from Congress, so kind of getting to that recognition from other nations and states. Congress didn't support them, so then they declared an independent republic. That lasted with courts, taxes, and a barter system. So some of the things that we talk about when you think about the Legion, what they have and what they don't have, and the New California Republic. And then finally, in 1786, North Carolina said, if you come back, we won't make you pay taxes. That wasn't good enough. Seems like a good deal to me, but it wasn't good enough. So after, sadly, some violence, the state of Franklin did in fact end. So I think the bottom line from all of this is when things fall apart or when things are in a state of chaos, whether it's in the wastelands or, it was a little chaotic when our country was being formed, people are trying to establish these entities, but it is in fact very challenging, and that's what we see coming out of fallout.
Thank you. Kate, let's talk about desecration of courts.
I would love to. That's the weird who makes cannibal comedy on the internet. I was like, I want to do this one. So first off, is he headed to prison? Just want to make sure you don't catch me in fun. Next slide. I do want to do a little content warning. I'm going to talk about a real life case that's a little bit disturbing. So just FYI, it does involve some stuff, dismemberment, and bomb stuff. All right, so just to recap, Dr. Woolsey has a cold fusion device that he has injected into his head. Everybody wants it. He wants it to totem Old Neighbor. He's not thinking that he's going to make the journey all the way, so he poisons himself and he tells Lucy to take his head to Moldaver. And she does, and decapitation hijinks ensue. So I know we just talked about how none of these laws are going to apply anymore, but too bad, I'm going to talk about California law. So there are a couple of applicable statutes here. One is a misdemeanor, one is a felony. The basic difference between them is willfulness. So in the misdemeanor statute, it's just knowingly, wantonly, or willfully if you mess with a corpse, basically. So it accounts for you being reckless. Maybe you're playing around where a body might be. Maybe you're even hanging out and you're playing with a bone and you're like, isn't this fun? But you don't know it's a human bone. That kind of thing. You know, you're a creep, but you're not a felon. So felony is all about willfulness. It is, you know, also includes all this pleasant stuff about necrophilia, and it also specifies that the remains are known to be human. So for it to be a felony, you have to know that it's human remains and you have to do it on purpose. So that's the basics here. Next slide, please. Now, both the felony and the misdemeanor statute anticipate authority of law. So they say you're allowed to do this if you have the authority of law. So in what circumstance, you may be wondering, would someone have the authority of law to desecrate a corpse? Well, I have a great example that just popped into my head. That because I am a creep, I immediately thought of this case. So in 2003, pizza delivery man Brian Wells robbed his local bank with a device strapped around his neck. And when the authorities detained him, he informed them that it was a bomb. It's unclear whether Brian knew that the bomb was active or not, but it did wind up going off, and it killed him. And the authorities, in order to remove the bomb and preserve it for evidence, had to cut Brian's head off. So they were authorized to do this to preserve the evidence of the bomb so they could figure out who made it. So that is an example of authority of law in desecration of a corpse. Now, does Lucy have it? I don't think so. Wilzig does give her verbal permission to do this, and there are some laws on the books about, you know, you can allocate someone or dedicate someone to say what you want done with your corpse, but it's more like, this is the funeral home I want to go to, not my friend can cut off my head and carry it through the desert, and, you know. So I don't think that she's going to have the authority of law to do this here. So next slide. Is she guilty? Yeah, she is. I think both misdemeanor and felony, she's going to be going down. It was willful, and it was on purpose, and she knew he was a human. So last slide. Moldaver actually is on the hook for something too. There is a statute that is about removing or possessing things from the body, so like taking someone's gold teeth, etc. And Moldaver extracts that gold fusion device out of Wilzig's head, so she's also looking at some prison time.
So, how could the Enclave be held accountable for starting the Great War 219 years later? I think this is an easy answer. We've done it before. You thaw them out and put the monsters on trial. After World War II, all the Nazis said, we were doing this to make Germany great again. It's okay that we got rid of the people we found to be undesirable. And the world went, no, it's not okay. And we put them on trial. The United States Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson took leave from the court to be the lead prosecutor. His opening statement took 2 days to deliver. I've read the indictment, because that's how I roll. And in one part of the opening statement is, civilization asks whether law is so laggard as to be utterly helpless to deal with criminals of this magnitude, crimes of this magnitude by criminals of this order of importance. Yes, you don't get to commit genocide. And those who decided, we don't like them. They're not like us. Let's burn the world down, and we'll be in the freezer waiting for it to be okay to come out. Prosecute them. Because those who, now, one argument is, pull the plug. We'll let them die. That's kind of like what Senator Robert Taft wanted to do, which was, we don't need war crimes. We take the Nazis behind the barn and shoot them. That's wrong. You have to hold them accountable. There has to be a trial, because you don't want a monument to Hitler or Goering or Goebbels. Take a Nazi. And if you ever see someone who has a statue of a Nazi in their home, you're in the wrong place. Leave. Those are bad people. So, yeah, you can do a war crimes trial. So what if it's 219 years later? The bad guys are in the freezer. Thaw them out and hold them accountable. So, Judge Najera, can we talk about the Brotherhood of Steel just killing ghouls for being abominations?
Yes, we can, because that is a burning question on the mind of every ghoul in the room. And the answer, as is the answer to nearly all legal questions, is depends. What does it depend on? Well, first of all, we have to answer the next burning question on the next side, which is, what is a ghoul? A ghoul, in my research, appears to be a mutated human being, or someone who took some kind of experimental drug like that, unfortunate squire that is, and was, as a result of this, became a ghoul. It is, either way, it's a person who was a human being who was left disabled due to the exposure of an intervening element. I'm going to say this a few times, a human being. These people are afflicted, they have facial and body deformities as a result of this illness, and they can also turn feral. What does this mean? It means they are all disabled human beings. So let's stop calling them ghouls. That's almost a curse word or a slang, and let's call them by their names, like Cooper Howard or Marie. Now, being human beings, they have certain rights. There are three that I put up there, and one is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the template for the implementation of human rights worldwide. The second one is the American with Disabilities Act, which specifically deals with this situation, what rights do disabled human beings have. And third is in the state of California, where all this takes place, we have the Unruh Act, which takes the template of the American with Disabilities Act and expands it. And it says simply that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, that they all are deemed to have such rights as the right to life, liberty, and security. That's what these ghouls have. So the answer to the question, what is a ghoul, is that they are a disabled human being with all of the attendant rights. Now, on the next slide, we answer the question, what is the Brotherhood of Steel? It appears to be some kind of a voluntary being the key word here, paramilitary group with kind of a religious cult aspect to it. In many ways, it is no different from, say, the Ku Klux Klan or any other kind of cult, or quite frankly, any criminal street gang. Now, in California, we put all of those categories into Penal Code 186.22, which is criminal street gangs, which are defined by an ongoing group organization of 3 or more people. Yes, booyah, we got that. Having one or more of its primary activities the commission of a crime such as robbery, murder, or burglary. They steal to get this technology. They take things by force, which is robbery, which is to get this technology, and they murder to get this technology. Falls right into it. And finally, the members collectively engage in a pattern of, they all have a common name or identifying sign or symbol. And they engage in a pattern of criminal activity. So with no legal authority, the Brotherhood of Steel is just another outlaw gang committing murder. So, why did I say it depends? Because there's always that caveat. Remember I said some ghouls are feral. Well, if a feral ghoul attacks a member of the Brotherhood or someone that the Brotherhood is protecting, then they do have the defense of themselves or defense of others. But that is the only circumstance in which they can. And that's the same circumstance that applies to every other human being. Because what are ghouls? Human beings. Hey! Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Vanna, let's talk about...
Crimes could Yank be charged with for nuking shady sands? Well, guys, like everything else, it depends. But it depends, but it's a lot. So one of the cleanest potential laws you could be charged with is use of weapons of mass destruction. And basically what this criminalizes is if you use a WMD, so it's a device that's designed to give off radiation to hurt humans, and you hurt humans with it. And
basically, if death results, which we know that it does here, right? That's life imprisonment or eligible for the death penalty. Okay, but we don't need to stop there. There's more. So he could also be charged with first-degree murder, and I mean, this is a crime at the federal level or at the state level, if we're just talking about modern law here, right? And you have this unlawful killing with malice aforethought and premeditation. I mean, I don't think anybody thinks he just randomly came across a nuke and did this in the heat of passion. Obviously, this took some planning, and that satisfies your premeditation here, right? And every single person who got killed is a potential additional charge. So I think there's some screenshots where we can see that the population of Shady Sands was like 34,000 and some change at that time. But potentially there may have been other visitors. So this could be thousands and thousands of potential murders, right? And we also have on top of this other potential crimes for radioactive dispersion devices, acts of nuclear terrorism. I mean, there's a lot that he could be charged with, right? And then there's also more. He probably acted with others, guys. Do we think that he just got in himself and put this together? No. So that would support a conspiracy charges, right? And there's not mergers, so you can be convicted of both conspiracy and the underlying crime. And these can be consecutive sentences. So he could potentially be in prison the rest of his life. And then there's also potential ramifications under international law. So the crimes against humanity, indiscriminate attacks against civilians. So we've got the Rome Statute, Article 7 of the first, and the Geneva Conventions. And I mean, look, guys, nuking civilians, that's going to be bad. He's going to be potentially be on trial. And it doesn't end there. It's not just one crime, right? He's potentially liable for a lot of different murders, and corporations can also be criminally liable. So Vault-Tec, as his employer, could be on the hook for this. I don't know if you guys remember, like Enron, also PG&E. I mean, corporations can be charged with crimes, and that can be the downfall of a corporation ultimately. I mean, courts can impose sanctions that can be monetary. They can also appoint someone to be in charge and oversee everything. Companies can lose their licenses. So companies can go under as a result of these kinds of criminal charges. So the ramifications aren't just for Inc. It's also Vault-Tec and anybody who potentially acted with him.
So on the note of conspiracies, Katrina, can you share your thoughts on the liability for all of our corporate actors that get together and figuring out it's going to be in our stockholders' best interest to involve?
Correct. So as Hannah just mentioned, in the very basic level, you can be charged as a corporation for most of the things she was discussing. So that's your criminal conspiracy, your treason, and potentially your war crimes. But the question comes down to, did they cause or contribute to the nuclear war, or did they merely profit from it? Because as Josh mentioned, these corporations have a fiduciary duty, a duty to their shareholders to maximize the profit. So that creates an interesting issue here, because the same issues that essentially create or cause a catastrophe profit from it. So you have a fundamental accountability problem. The corporations themselves benefit from weakening the institutions that were meant to regulate them. Which creates some interesting parallels from the real world. So the first example of that would be big tobacco. What big tobacco, in most cases, mostly what they were on the hook for was failure to warn combined with active deception. So do we think that Vault-Tec knew the risks and misled the public? Most likely, right? But it might be a little bit more of a gray area for those other corporations. So what the corporations were charged with in those big tobacco cases were fraud and misrepresentation, as I mentioned before, because as we all know, they had internal evidence that smoking caused concern. It was designed for addiction itself. The risks were downplayed, omitted, or they straight up deceived their customers by suggesting marketing that was healthy, light, or low tar, for example. You can be charged with failure to warn, and that's what they were successful with against big tobacco as well, which just means You have to disclose the known risks, and the warnings have to be clear, prominent, honest. You've seen those in California, right? The crop, whatever it is, with the cancer-causing things, that's failure to warn as well. So in this situation, Vault-Tec marketed the vaults as safety and survival, but in reality, they were manufacturing social experiments for the unwitting and unknowing vaultees. Design defect may also apply in this situation as well. If you design something that's unreasonably dangerous, or it could be safer, you could be on the hook for design defects. So in this situation, we know cigarettes were engineered for addiction. Vaults were created for harm, so they probably were defective by design. It would be a strict liability situation. So from the template of big tobacco, then we have some other examples, which were opioids, chemical manufacturers, and probably the closest parallel, which will be our fossil fuel companies' climate litigation, which tracks really, really cleanly in that the companies in both of these situations developed the technology, they influenced the policy, and they profited from the escalation. So Vault-Tec was in control of natural resources, water, food, and safety. And the fossil fuel companies, while not in control of those things, they do directly influence the being able to habit regions entirely, the availability of natural resources. They change extreme weather exposure and public outcomes. But because the risks are so long-term, they're diffuse, so they're spread out, right? They're global, and they're externalized, meaning everybody else pays the price. They downplay the risks, they continue to destroy for shareholder profit, and they delay transition. So a few other things too in the climate context that these companies could probably be on the hook for creating that nuclear war would be public nuisance, which is unreasonable interference with public rights like health and safety, because nuclear war inherently destroys natural resources. It's the ultimate interference with public rights.
I thought you were going to say it's the ultimate nuisance.
It's the ultimate nuisance. Consumer protection is another thing, which is misleading marketing. So the climate realm, that's greenwashing, right? You see all these products say we're natural, we're all healthy. That's misleading if it's not correct as well. Here again, Vault-Tec is marketing vaults as safety solutions, which we knew they very much weren't. And finally, there's potential for a securities fraud charge because they misrepresented the risk to investors, but I'm not sure that we have sufficient information to address that.
Well done. All right, panelists. Pedal to the metal so we can get to some questions. So, Judge Najera, let's talk about Cooper Howard. And is it okay to start a gunfight to collect a bounty?
Well, I have to answer that question with more questions because, as all the lawyers out there know, that is the nature of the law, and that is what judges are trained to do. So let's start with the first question, which is, how would you characterize the Enclave? And let's talk about the Enclave. The Enclave started as a secret society comprised of political, military, and corporate figures. Great. They're running the show behind the scenes, but they don't have any legitimacy. They're not a governmental entity. They've got no legal authority. But what they did was they acquired cold fusion technology legally, which means they owned it. So therefore, when Dr. Zwelig ran off with it, he stole it. Therefore, they are a private party seeking to recover the stolen property and have put out a reward for it. So far, so good. Now, let's go to the next slide and let's see how would we characterize it.
All of them.
Cooper Howard, we could call him a bounty hunter, which is really the real term is fugitive recovery agent. Okay, some people call him a hired gun, and some people might call him a reward seeker. Let's start with the bounty hunter. What can bounty hunters legally do? Well, I put the code sections up there, but what they can do is they're contracted to locate and arrest fugitives for surrender to the appropriate court, jail, or police department. It must be done to recover a bail or surety deposited to ensure the presence of an individual in court. That's really what a bounty hunter is. That wasn't Cooper's goal. He didn't want to arrest him and bring him to court. He was trying to kidnap him and steal back the missing cold fusion. So he's clearly not a bounty hunter, not a fugitive recovery agent. Now, some people would call him a reward seeker. Now, let's address this in the next slide. Okay, reward seeker, that is actually something that just deals with contracts. And here's the thing. A reward seeker deals with a contract and is thus governed by civil law. It's a contract to retrieve an item for a certain substantial thing. Now, On the civil side, it's illegal acts are barred from gaining rewards. In other words, you can't contract to perform an illegal act because that voids the contract. This is all spelled out in California Civil Code 1608. If a contract has an unlawful object, the entire contract is void. Civil Code 1598 clarifies that where a contract has a single object, and in this case the single object was to redeem the cold fusion technology, and the object is unlawful, and it was by any means necessary, that makes the entire contract void. Also, there are some criminal implications. Penal Code 190.21 states very clearly that murder for financial gain will result in death or outlawry. So if Cooper Howard is out there killing people for financial gain, he's going to face the death penalty. So knowing all of these answers to these two questions, let's look at the facts. The Ghouls started the gunfight by shooting off Dr. Wilzig's leg. The old lady store proprietor yells, "I'll give 1,000 bottle caps to whoever kills the Ghoul," and the gunfight is on. Can the Ghoul claim self-defense? No, because he started the gunfight. And like Han Solo, if he shot first, so he doesn't get self-defense. So the Ghoul is not a bounty hunter, he's not a reward seeker, and he has no legal defense. Therefore, the verdict is not justified.
Vanna, let's talk about, well, delegating authority from the United States to corporations.
All right, so the short answer here, since we're going fast now, the government can delegate some things, but not everything, and there's limits. So let's go to the next slide. Do a quick, very quick here. So basically, and this goes back to this key case from the 1920s, and you see C.J. Taft up there. That is that Taft, former president. So Congress can delegate authority, but there has to be this intelligible principle, and basically they can delegate authority, but they got to give guidance, right? And usually that authority is delegated to other parts of the government. So when you're talking about private actors, that is much more limited. So let's go to the next slide. Now, private entities can have government power delegated to them, but it's under very limited circumstances. So we have this recent case that involved Amtrak, and in that case, sorry guys, in that case, we're okay with delegation when the entity is effectively governmental. So with Amtrak, the government controls it, it appoints the leadership, it sets the mission. So that's a very specific set of circumstances. And Voltec's not that, right? RobCo's not that. None of these companies are that. So let's talk about what's allowed. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we see this kind of thing pretty frequently, right? Like with defense contractors, private prisons, nuclear operations, but those things are supposed to be operating under government control, right? Voltec's doing something that's very, very different. So let's get our key takeaways here real fast. Voltec is basically deciding who gets to survive, how Vault societies operate, and they're doing human experimentation, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And that starts to look less like contracting and more like private sovereignty, right? So the Constitution lets you outsource certain services, not sovereignty. And I think that's our key takeaway here.
Thank you. Hey.
Yes, Josh.
I have a comment.
I'm sorry.
Is Voltec like a HOA?
Well, let's find out. Let's go to our side. So the definition of an HOA is not, in fact, an organization you pay exorbitantly so they can pick on you about the color of your flower pots. It is defined in the California Civil Code as a nonprofit corporation or unincorporated association created for the purpose of managing a common interest development. And these are the three categories of common interest development. And man, did I go deep on this. I was like, what is a stock cooperative? I'm going to rewatch all of the Fallout, and I'm going to listen to every word about who owns what. And I went so hard on this. And then I did all of that, and then I reread that first sentence, and I was like, oh, Voltec's not a nonprofit or an unincorporated entity. So this is about to be the shortest presentation I've done for the Legal Geeks. Next slide, please. No. No, it's not.
It's important to read the first sentence.
Right. Let this be listened to all of us.
There are folks who read insurance policies and go straight to the exceptions, ignoring what's covered. Don't do that.
Don't be like me.
Well, be like me. Judge Wright, can we talk about Vault 33's treatment of prisoners?
Sure, and I'm first reminded of the rule that is job one is read the statute and then read the statute again. But turning to this question, so Vault 33's treatment of the raiders after they raided Vault 33, killed several people or maimed them and then were captured, raises a number of interesting issues. And I think there are two scenes that really struck me. One of them is all the raiders are in the room together. They're basically in raider jail now inside of Vault 33. And, you know, they're under conditions that I'll get to whether there's any kind of due process violation there. But they're all there. The second thing that really caught my eye is there's a scene where, under the theory that the raiders can be rehabilitated, they are trying to talk to one of the raiders alone. And when he becomes violent and verbally abusive, they sedate him. You all know what I'm talking about? So, okay. So those two things really caught my eye. So let's talk about kind of big picture. First of all, Vault 33's treatment of the raiders raises due process issues, both procedural and substantive. Substantive due process is the standard under the federal constitution is basically, are there restrictions on the prisoners? Do they have a valid theological purpose, or are they arbitrary? That's a pretty high standard well, it's really a pretty low standard. It's really hard to violate substantive due process in the prison context, that's what I'll just say. Okay, so one of the things that struck my eye, though, is Vault 33 doesn't appear to have ever put these raiders on trial. They just put them in a room. And it seems obvious that their conduct is unlawful, but that's not how we do things in the United States, or that's not how we're supposed to be doing things. We're supposed to be giving people due process. And so if we were to apply the federal constitutional standards, I think Vault 33's got a problem there. Now, let's talk about Eighth Amendment. Eighth Amendment also applies in the prison context. People think of cruel and unusual punishment, and we all think about gory things that I'm not going to get into. But this can apply to other things too, such as your conditions of confinement, whether you're receiving adequate medical treatment, and those types of issues. If you detain somebody, if you incarcerate them, you have obligations to them under the Eighth Amendment, under our Constitution. Overcrowding can be an issue as well. Notwithstanding the fact that all of the raiders were in a room together, frankly, in my eye, I didn't see any Eighth Amendment violations. Take that for what it's worth. So, okay. The scene where the raider is sedated, that brings up the forced medication question. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of prisons who would love to sedate people that are incarcerated when they become violent or verbally abusive, but that is also not permissible. You cannot just inject somebody with a sedative because you don't like what they're saying. This also comes up in the competency context, which frankly I think is kind of an interesting question for some of the raiders, whether or not they're actually competent to understand the implications of what they're doing. There's a Supreme Court case called Sell versus United States, which basically says if a person's not competent to stand trial, the government can't force them to take antipsychotic drugs to make them competent only so they can stand trial without balancing their individual liberty interests in being free from forced medication against the state's interest in trying to defend it. So there are a lot of things that come into it when you're talking about forced medication. In the context of somebody who's already been deemed incompetent, you still have to follow certain federal regulations before you can actually forcibly medicate them. This is actually quite a big issue, and there's a lot of law around it. So the sedating of the raider because he was disrespectful, abusive, and violent was, I would say, a legal violation of the federal law. Then we come to the last point, which is the fact that somebody killed all the raiders. They were poisoned, right? Now, the difference between murder and execution is basically whether it's state sanctioned, and you couldn't get into that, but we're not going to. But what I will say is that whoever murdered the raiders, based on what I can tell, doesn't appear to have done it well, whoever killed the raiders, I should say, doesn't appear to have done it under the guise of any kind of state sanction. It doesn't appear that Vault 33 made the decision to poison the raiders. Maybe you'd argue that it was somebody from the overseers who did it, but still, again, Vault Tech is a for-profit corporation, not a governmental entity. So basically, there's a real problem with just the killing of all of those raiders, and technically, I think that would be murder. So Vault 33's treatment was probably lawful in most circumstances, but they still all ended up dead.
So, Kate, let's talk about human experimentation. Good feel-good topic.
Yes, all my talks are feel good. So we're limiting to Vault 4 in this because we don't have that much time. So just to recap really quickly, Lucy and Maximus go into Vault 4 and they discover that there are scientists trying to breed human and non-human hybrids who are resistant to radiation, like this little cutie, the Goldberg. Next slide. So we have one source of ethical guidelines on human experimentation is the Nuremberg Code. This was developed after World War II in response to Nazi experiments on concentration camp prisoners. And it's a set of guidelines. There are 10 of them for ethical human experimentation. And number one, the literal number one and the overall one is informed consent. And informed consent means you have to be aware of what you are consenting to. You can't be told, this is a nutrition experiment, and then be injected with diseases. You have to actually know what's going on. So next slide. So the Nuremberg Code isn't actually law. It's just a set of guidelines. So states and countries have codified the Nuremberg Code in their own ways, including California in their health and safety code. And California's health and safety code says that consent has to be in writing and obtained without force or fraud or coercion or any of that stuff. And crucially, participants have to have a right to withdraw at any time. So, do we think that the subjects in Vault 4 gave informed consent? I don't think so. In a video where the scientist says that they were given unsupervised ability to do whatever they wanted, they also said that the subjects were resistant. So that means that the subject sounds like they weren't resisting. And in this video, that's very disturbing that Lucy finds this woman is strapped to a chair underwater. She gives birth to a bunch of fish that then turn around and eat her. And she is screaming no the whole time. So she is restrained and she is objecting. She's attempting to withdraw. They do not allow it. So no, they could be liable for a year of jail time, which seems low, quite frankly, and $50,000 in fines per violation. So per subject. So that would be pretty hefty.
Judge Wright, can we talk about marriage and adult?
I can, although this is beyond the scope of federal law because marriage is a function of state law, but I'm still gonna go out on a limb and give some opinions. So there's two types of marriage. There's what's called regular and irregular marriage. And irregular marriage, people often call that common law marriage. And I'm gonna get to that in a minute. But we have Lucy and her wedding in the first episode, and it looks like a regular marriage. Marriage is a contract between two. Usually it's two, and there's it's usually two individuals. The individuals have to have capacity and consent, so they have to. Everyone in the marriage has to agree, and then they also have to have the legal capacity, and there's some restrictions around age and that type of thing, and mental capacity. So we seem to have both of those requirements met. I would say it looks like it's a contract between two individuals. But the third requirement is whether it's regulated and recognized by the state. So I think, Vault 33 would have recognized this marriage. Vault 33 probably isn't really a state, that's the closest thing you're going to get. So if you take Vault 33 as a state, the marriage would have been legally binding, although extremely short. And then, but if you don't think Vault 33 is a state, you don't have a regular marriage. So your other option is an irregular marriage. And this is what we call common law marriage. I think California does recognize common law marriage.
We don't. We have Marvin.
Okay, all right. Oh, thank you so much. Okay. People throw around the word common law marriage a fair bit, even in states that don't recognize it. And it basically requires mutual agreement, again, so kind of like that consent piece, cohabitation, and presenting as a married couple. Lucy and her putative spouse really don't meet those two last requirements at all. So I would say that the marriage is not legally binding either as regular or an irregular marriage.
Vanna, this is...
Most important question.
Yes. The single most important question. Vanna. Is dog meat a good boy?
So guys, we're just gonna talk legally now, okay? Now, I'd say arguably no. Don't get angry. I don't want to hurt your words. Okay. Now, dogs are classified legally as a breed, which, as a dog owner, that feels wrong. But it's what it is, guys. Now, if we're looking at tort law, we're gonna ask: is a dog considered dangerous, right? And so, for example, if an owner knows that their dog has a tendency to bite people or has bitten people before, yeah, that's not good. You can be liable for that. Let's look at dog meat specifically. So, dog meat attacks raiders, super mutants, hostile ghouls, protects companions, has some, restraint with civilians, and we don't see any evidence of real dangerous, unprovoked behavior or unprovoked dangerous behavior. And look, dog meat does seem to act in defense of others, right? And it definitely is not a menace. But I think that legally and morally, guys, we just gotta consider the answer is no, because dog meat's a very good girl.
I disagree. I think dog meat is the best girl.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. That's a fair disagreement.
Okay. So, okie dokie. So we have time for some questions, which is why we went fast. Yes, Kate.
Guys, we have a Fallout cosplay photo shoot tomorrow at 4 p.m. and San Diego Comic-Con Fallout Friday at 11 a.m.
Okay, glad to help with that. Other questions? Yes, in front.
Do you think they would try to use 5150 as an excuse to medicate the raiders?
So, do you think they would use 5150 as an excuse to medicate the raiders? And Judge Najera, your thoughts?
I think they could, though. I think they might also want to, just a little different from what you said, under 1368, they might want to declare them incapable of being able to stand trial, and then they could consider medicating them. So there's two, 5150 doesn't really deal with trials, but 1368 sure does, so that would do it.
Cool. You in the gray, and then Flash.
So first I want to say I'm a huge Fallout fan and history major. This is probably the nerdiest panel I did.
Thank you so much.
The question I had is, in the games, we have a couple of characters who claim to be presidents of the United States, but one of them was never elected, the other one turned out to be a robot computer, so that was obviously crap. My question to you is, at what point in the Fallout timeline did the United States die and the Constitution stopped applying?
I'll take that when the bombs dropped.
Okay.
Because is there a continuity of government planning? Did they actually enact it? Last question, Flash.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. Benjamin Wu here on behalf of the Legal Aid and Foundation. My question is, do you think that the artificial intelligence units and DAX units like John Henry Eden or Falls 3, could those be held accountable for their own place war crimes or artificial intelligences?
That once again, we have to answer the question, is artificial intelligence a human being? Because only a human being could be brought to trial. And that's going to be a much deeper dive we can do right now.
Watch no local courts for more. Whether chat
Doing that in the next panel.
Yeah.
So, thank you all. We'll hang out outside. Thank you. We'll see you soon. Take care. Okay, good. Good.
We gotta run down. See if we can get a good picture. Okay.
Yeah.
I got a few minutes. Okay. Yeah.